Tyler Tashman with the Des Moines Register here with Dargan Southard on Tuesday following Kirk Ferentz's weekly news conference. I guess the biggest news of the day was that Addison Ostrenga is done for the season. He went out in the first quarter of that Iowa State game, and it turns out to be an Achilles injury. Done for the season. He's already had it repaired, so that's unfortunate news for Iowa, as he was Iowa's first string tight end, and another kind of hit to the offense in the passing game. But I was gonna have to forge on here. UMass last non Big Ten game of the regular season. Dargan, what is so no Addison Ostrenga for the rest of the season? I mean, what are your initial impressions, and kind of where does Iowa go to the passing game and the tight end room from here?
Yeah, I think we can officially say that Kirk Ferentz put the preseason jinx on his injury status because, you know, obviously Estrenga's the headliner here, but Reese Vanderzee, Kamari Moulton, a couple O linemen banged up this weekend. Like they're all happening on one side of the ball, and it's not the side of the ball that you want the injuries to happen on, particularly. But the Estrenga injury is tough because he's a guy who obviously dealt with injuries last year. I know that he had kind of pegged this as maybe being his last year going into this season. That may change now that he's out for the season, but again, this passing game is kind of fluttering in the wind right now and really doesn't have a whole lot of rhythm, really doesn't have a whole lot of flow, consistency to it. And so when you take, what's always been a key weapon at Iowa, even if, maybe the tight ends haven't been quite as robust the last couple of years as previous seasons, it's still a big loss, and it's still a big veteran piece on the offense that is trying to really find any signs of positivity right now across the board. So, you'll probably see more Hayden Large. You'll probably see more Zach Ortworth. You'll probably see more DJ. How do you say his last name again?
Vanami, I believe.
Banami. Okay. Well, we'll have to get a Nico Ragaini clarification on that, perhaps. But yeah, so pretty thin right there, digging down the depth chart. Not exactly what you wanted week 2, especially when, again, the offense has not really shown any signs of being anything different from what it's been the last few years. And obviously there's a lot of frustration with that. So, you don't really want to be in a spot, I feel like, where your result against UMass needs to look good or needs to matter how it looks. But I feel like that's where we're at with this Iowa offense right now, is even going against UMass, which has an FCS loss on its resume. I don't think Iowa can't really be beggars. Beggars can't be choosers when it comes to finding offensive success. And I think Iowa can start with, a strong game on Saturday.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look back and I watched the replay of the play that Ostrenga got hurt, and it wasn't like anything super glaring. It was like, oh, that was a broken bone, or like, it. But then you just think about, it makes me think of, now that we know what it was, of like the NBA playoffs. You had like Tyrese Halliburton get injured in Game 7. You had Damian Lillard earlier in the playoffs, and it's just, and Jason Tatum too.
Yeah.
And it's just like you feel bad because that's just a tough injury, and he still does have a red shirt. He hasn't taken a red shirt, so there's a possibility that he could return for the 2026 season. But the Achilles injury is a pretty long process of coming back. And the other thing is, you think about like Iowa's tight end room the last few seasons have had like just bad injury luck. When 2 seasons ago, Luke Lachey and Eric all both had the season-ending injuries. And then last season, Addison Ostrenga, he dealt with an unrelated injury and was out for some time. And now this. So yeah, I mean, another name of the trio that you mentioned that, I mean, could be in a little bit more of a role is Thomas Meyer, a true freshman from the state of Iowa. He traveled to Iowa State, so he's on the traveling roster. But Zach Ortworth is atop the depth chart. Then you have Hayden Large, and then Vanami is a redshirt freshman. But not a ton of, Ortworth has made a few starts at Iowa, but not a ton of like starting experience. And like not only experience, like Hayden Large just played, but like there's just not a ton of catches in that room right now. So you know, and Kirk Ferentz also saying Kamari Moulton and Reese Fandersy not expected to play against UMass, which isn't a great surprise. If there is good injury news to come out of the news conferences, that both Stevens and Jennings Dunker both have been practicing, so that was encouraging for Iowa's offensive line. But I guess, I mean, that kind of brings us into the conversation about the passing game of like, I mean, what do we want to see against UMass? Because I think we've reached the point where anything positive you will take if you're an Iowa fan, regardless of the opponent. Like it felt like against Albany, it was kind of like, okay, well, if the offense, if Mark Gronowski throws well, then you still need to see it against Iowa State. But I feel like we're at the point now where it's like it doesn't matter the opponent. You want to see any type of downfield shots or explosive passing would be a good sign. So what are your expectations or thoughts or hopes about kind of where Iowa's passing game goes, in week 3?
Yeah, and that's what I was, saying that like most of the time in a Big Ten team in a situation like this, it's like okay, everybody's going to have a good day, the stats are going to look good, and it's not going to mean a whole lot. But I'm right with you that there is no opponent bad enough that Iowa can't get excited about having offensive success against because I feel like this unit as a whole, even though not everybody has been there through this, probably the last 4 or 5 years when everything's gotten really bad, is there's got to be some confidence that's fluttering here, among the skill guys and just the offensive operation in general. So I think just you think about the basketball phrase, just a shooter needed to see it go in, when they're on a slump. And I feel like that's really what it is, whether it's a couple of 20-yard passes, a 20-yard touchdown pass, maybe if we're getting a little bold there. But yeah, it's not in a good spot. And I think, what this situation has the potential to do, given everything that's come before it, is I really feel like if the offense doesn't get momentum going pretty much ASAP, that this has the feeling to be the most deflating element of this run of offensive futility because you changed the coordinator, you got the quarterback, you got a guy who is a winner, who has a pretty strong resume coming in, and it felt like for everything in 21, 22, 23, 24 that was tough and difficult. You rebuilt the QB room. You got some guys out of there who you felt like were not helping the team. And so for all of that to happen and the offense still look like what it does, which is what we've been watching for several years now, I think that for Iowa fans, for anybody associated with the program, it's going to get tougher and it's going to get more deflating because there's a lot of work going into trying to fix this, but there's not really much that's happening on the field that indicates a ton of progress is being made. And so, as we all know, Iowa's schedule gets harder; it doesn't get easier. And so, this was kind of the stretch of the season where you thought, okay, yeah, there's some tricky games in here, but Iowa should be able to find some sort of offensive rhythm to propel itself into your Penn State, your Oregons, your USC games, stuff like that. And yet here we are, basically saying they need a great performance against UMass to keep, confidence at any sort of respectable level. So again, I think Iowa, you know, I liked your question today about, the dilemma of finding your best path to winning the game versus also needing to improve a specific area the most because yeah, I mean they could go out there and probably throw for under 100 yards and beat UMass by 3 touchdowns if they wanted to, but in terms of the big picture, like that doesn't really help you a whole lot. And so I think there needs to be significant just seeing something that looks like what a normal passing game is supposed to look like. I think is probably all you can do with this matchup.
Yeah, I mean that, and I was curious about that because it's like I think it would be easy for Iowa, like I mean, this is from more of a fan's perspective, not as much so like this is not what I think Iowa will do, but it's like you use UMass as like a testing ground basically of like let's throw it around the yard. If you throw a pick, so what? Like let's just try to build some confidence, try things out, like take some shots downfield, take risks because there are no guarantees after this UMass game. There are no guarantees. You go on the road against Rutgers. You have Indiana at home. I mean, it's Big Ten play from here on out, and it's like I think there's a good portion of people that are like just open it up, open it up in the passing game against UMass because it's pretty low risk and high reward, I guess you could say. And obviously, I don't think that's what I was going to do because that's not how I was built. And Kirk Ferentz's answer was basically they want to keep it there. Generally speaking, their game plan going into games is to keep it like 50-50 basically with run and pass. And obviously, we know that that's not been the case because I was gone super run heavy like last season when you have Jackson Stratton back there. I get it. And he's not experienced. You want to lean on one of the best running backs in college football, which was Caleb Johnson. And it feels like hope is kind of fleeting right now. And if you want to keep hope, my message is that I felt like the last 2 seasons, there was a point in the season where it just felt like we understood what Iowa's passing game was and that it just wasn't going to get better. And, I think there was a point at Deacon Hill's tenure where that was the case. And then last season when just, Brendan Sullivan gets hurt, Cade McNamara gets hurt, even maybe when Cade McNamara was still healthy, you still felt like you knew what the ceiling was of Iowa's passing game. And then when you have Jackson Stratton in there, it's just kind of like a survive and advance type feel. I think right now, if there's still hope that it can get better because there is time. Like your game, heading into game 3, I think it's a lot of the last 2 seasons building up because you've seen how things have unfolded and how it hasn't gotten better. But there's still time for it to get better, and you have someone back there who is probably the most capable quarterback that Iowa's had in years in terms of the resume that he has brought coming in. So if you want reason to be hopeful, it's that it's not game 10 yet. It's not game 11. I don't have the feeling of like Iowa's passing game is done. There's no chance that it's going to get better. I think there's still a chance. I also think there's a chance it doesn't, but I'm saying I don't think it's defined, undoubtedly yet. Like there's still a chance that Iowa can get better. They're just going to have to, because there was progress from week 1 to week 2 for Mark Gronowski. It was a low bar to clear after week 1, but I thought he looked more comfortable in the pocket, and you just kind of need to keep building on that moving forward.
And that was a big topic today. Gronowski's comfort level, just the understanding of how he operates and how Iowa can, put him and the team in the best situation to win. And, I think there's a little bit of that that's concerning because, Gronowski has been here for a few months and has been building, has talked a lot about the relationships building with the guys on the offense. But at the same time, he missed spring practice. That probably makes a difference. Obviously, the injury situation hasn't helped. But I think, like you said, everybody's really just at the point where they're not going to give Iowa the benefit of the doubt much longer. And a lot of people have already stopped doing that because the time time remaining is really all you can latch onto right now if you want to feel like that there's still hope and progress to be made. And if you're Kirk Ferentz, obviously that's what you have to do. You have to get your team. You can't have a team be completely off course mentally 2 weeks into the year. But it's certainly easy to understand the frustration that everybody has when you know it's it's gone through 5 or 6 different guys at this point, and the results continue to look pretty much the same. And so, yeah, and the running game is interesting too because after week 1, even with Kamari Bolton's injury, you felt like that was in a pretty good spot with what Xavier Williams delivered. And then it's Jazz Patterson who pretty much takes control of the backfield against Iowa State. And so, I don't know exactly how long Moulton's going to be out. It could be a little bit still. And so, I think you'll really see that committee go week to week in how the carries are distributed. And I think in-game feel is going to be very important there, just with who ends up getting the workload, or the biggest share of the workload. So that's another chance to kind of get everybody's confidence back up against UMass, because they're going to need it moving forward.
And I mean, the numbers, I'm trying to kind of stay a little more positive here, but like the numbers don't lie. Iowa has,
It's
in,
hard.
in terms of passing yards per game right now in the FBS, Iowa is almost dead last. So, I mean, the numbers aren't good. And, um, I think looking back at the Iowa State game, watching some of that back, like it just felt like when Iowa got off schedule, like this, it's hard to believe that they're going to convert. Like once they get to the
Yeah.
third and longs, third and mediums, it's just you just don't have much confidence in the passing game to be able to get it done. And um, there was a few drops as well. I felt like I was receiving game took a step back from week 1 to week 2. I felt like week 1, the problem was more Mark Gronowski. He wasn't really throwing it accurately as he needed to. I felt like week 2, there it was more on Iowa's receivers of not making the catches or plays that you would have liked to have seen them. And we had talked about in the spring, in the fall, of like the hope that this might be kind of a breakthrough from the receivers, like finally kind of on the other end of the equation, helping out Iowa's quarterback, but it didn't feel like they've done enough. And we haven't seen that through the first 2 games. So I don't pin it all on Mark Gronowski. I think there's more that I think he could use more help around him. And I felt especially that way after the Iowa State game. So it's not like I think it's a joint, thing that they have to figure out. And maybe it's the fact that Mark Gronowski, I mean, he wasn't able to build that on-field chemistry with guys in the spring because he was out due to injuries. So I mean, that's just the reality of what Iowa has to deal with. But now you have that's where I really think now Addison Ostrenga isn't around, for the rest of the season. Reese Vandersey, I feel like Iowa really misses Reese Vandersey of having that kind of bigger bodied receiver you can throw it up to. It felt like he was kind of primed to have a real impact leading up to the season, and he's yet to play. Jarrett Bowie had a role in the Music City Bowl, and he hasn't played yet this season. So there's still a lot of moving pieces here that I think you kind of want to see figured out, not just Mark Gronowski, who has, taken some heat. Anything else, Dargan, you want to add about, the UMass game or passing game or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about, you mentioned if Iowa gets off schedule, that it pretty much derails everything. And that, it's just not a fun and enjoyable way to play football and call a game, I would imagine, when it feels like, one negative play, or certainly a sack, or even something that doesn't get 3 or 4 yards on first down. You feel like the drive is derailed at that point. And, operating that way, I feel like it makes everybody tense. Kirk Ferentz talked about some guys pressing today. And, I think that's how you end up with the drops when passes are thrown where they need to be. I think about kind of like a baseball defense when a pitcher is on the mound walking a bunch of guys. They get restless, they get antsy, and then when the ball finally does get put in play, that's when they make an error, or are uncharacteristically shaky defensively. And I think that's kind of part of what it is. There's no rhythm, there's no consistency. Obviously, yes, these guys are working a ton in practice, but when you're only getting, maybe 1 or 2 balls thrown your way over the course of an entire game, and that goes for everybody, it can be hard to stay locked in when you do get your opportunity. So a big week for everybody on offense to show some progress.
A couple other things. RPOs, I was been trying to utilize that, and that obviously gives them some flexibility in terms of like basically being a Mark Gronowski being able to read the defense. And one specific type of RPO that Iowa debuted against Iowa State was the slow mesh, which is what Warren Ruggiero brought from Wake Forest. That was interesting to see. It feels like, based on what Kirk Ferentz said, like that's still going to be somewhat of a part of the offense, but that's a different wrinkle, I guess. And I mean, it makes sense because when Ruggiero kind of masterminded that at Wake Forest, it was because he felt there was a talent gap between what Wake Forest had and what they were competing against in the ACC. So he was like, how can we kind of manufacture something that's going to give us an advantage? And it feels like that kind of fits what Iowa needs, right? Like they're not going to have the most talented receivers. How can they gain maybe just a little bit of an advantage here and there? So, it seems like that's going to continue to be, possibly a part of the repertoire. I don't know how big of a big of a role it'll be, but yeah. And then in terms of like we were talking about getting behind the sticks behind, it just felt like there's just very few, like very small margin for error that Iowa has. Like they cannot afford to make many mistakes offensively, because if they do and it sets them back, it's really difficult for them to play from behind. They have to stay on schedule as much as they can. Trying to think if there's anything else. I think we covered most of it. Obviously, is very passing game heavy, which is kind of the main main
Par
topic.
for the course.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
the slow mesh is interesting because if that's something that Iowa can find some success with, I think that it's something that is going to stick and be around because again, as you said, when you're fighting an uphill battle and you're looking for every possible advantage, even if it's in the slightest. These are the kinds of things that you settle on. And so I think breaking it out week two is not a bad idea to kind of give yourself some more time to incorporate that and have that be something you can lean on. But it'll be interesting because it does kind of throw an interesting wrinkle in things, and it can be a bit deceiving at times. And so, again, Iowa, there no stone needs to go unturned at this point.
yeah. And for those that are unaware, so slow mesh is basically a version of the RPO, and it's just like a very slow version where the quarterback keeps it in the running back stomach for it's like almost in slow motion, and then makes a decision. So it's hard for defenses to decide what they're going to do with it. And so Iowa kind of bringing it out a little bit, and we'll see where it goes from here. And also the fact that Iowa brought it out against Iowa State, like now opponents know that it's something that Iowa has in their bag of tricks, so they can try to be more prepared for it. But that might be one of those things that even if it's coming at a certain point, it's going to be hard to stop it. Like Warren Ruggiero had a ton of success at Wake Forest with it, and opposing defenses knew it was coming. So appreciate everyone for tuning in. Myself and Chad Leistica will have our normal radio show on Wednesday, and then plan to do our normal live show after the UMass game on Saturday. So appreciate everyone tuning in, and we will talk to you then.